Voice.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
Welcome to the Rima Reports. I'm Rima Lebo, MD. I am the Medical Director of the Natural Solutions Foundation, the largest health freedom organization in the world. And with me, as always, my co-host and co-trustee, Ralph Fusatola, JD. Good evening, Ralph.
Good evening, Dr. Rima. Great evening it's going to be, too.
Oh, yes, we have some amazingly important information. And given the increasing danger that we find ourselves in from the supposed guardians of our safety in the United States, this is an especially important conversation. Usually, what we do is have a discussion of the health freedom news of the week in review, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And then we bring our guest on. But tonight, because of circumstances that give us a limited time to have our guest with us, we're going to start with a discussion. As long as she can stay with us, we welcome her. Our guest is Janet Phallen, and she is an author, a journalist, a truth teller, a poet, and a brave, brave woman. Welcome to the show, Janet.
Thank you, Rima. It's good to be back on your show.
Thank you. It's always a pleasure. Janet, let's cut right to the chase. First, I'd like you to tell our listeners about your new book, and then we'll talk about all the things leading up to it and all the things connected with it. But I want everyone listening to have the opportunity to hear as much as you care to share with us about why you wrote this book and why we need to pay very careful attention to what's in this book.
Well, thank you, Rima. And once again, I really appreciate the opportunity to discuss this on the air. My new book is entitled Exile, and it discusses the circumstances that impelled me to flee my country, which is the United States, for my own safety and security. The book, I think, operates on a number of levels because it's not only my personal story. The book and my situation ended up having a juncture, I would say, with some of the global agendas of the United States. And although I was fairly unsuspecting at the time that the events of the book details were unfolding, it didn't take me too much longer after I was assaulted nearly lethally by the police on January 3rd of 2003. It didn't take me too much longer to put together the pieces as to what was really going on here. So in a sense, my book and my story is a prism through which one can get a very sharp, clear, and somewhat unusual perspective on the both the domestic and the international agenda of the United States of America.
But I want to interrupt you, Janet, and I want to tell our listeners that I know Janet. Through the course of these communications, she has become a friend, and I know enough about what she's about to tell you and what other people are experiencing and the lethality of the increasingly militarized supposed peacekeeping forces to tell you that Janet is not paranoid, she is not mad, she is brave. Go ahead, Janet.
Well, thank you very much, Rima, for that endorsement. In the process of writing the book, I decided to put an appendix, and there is an exhibits section which provides external documentation to the rather outrageous circumstances that are detailed in the book, so that there is an anchor, in a sense, provided. These are court records, these are police records, these are medical records, and so forth, which heavily support and demonstrate the allegations I'm making in the book of extreme revocation of rights. This revocation, became quite lethal for me, and at the point that I left the country in 2008, it was pretty much with the understanding that I would not be returning. So I am essentially in exile. So my situation began in 2000, when I was first approached by a man named Jack Leonard Smith. That's the name he's using. We don't believe that's his real name. Jack Smith is a federal agent, and he was on assignment. I happened to be his assignment, although none of this was disclosed to me at the time. And he essentially lured me into a romantic relationship with him. And as a result of this relationship, the horrific details that are laid out in the book took place. The significance here, number one, is that the U.S. government is actually planting federal agents on people with the mission of murder. Now, a lot of us are concerned, and rightfully so, that President Obama is now issuing kill orders for Americans abroad. If Americans are suspected, and it has to be suspected because nothing is being proven in a court of law with these kill orders. If Americans are suspected of terrorism abroad, in several instances now, President Obama has issued kill orders. There's another one that apparently just got issued again recently, although the person's name is not being disclosed. So, as concerning as this is, I believe that the revelations in my book take this to another level. Because
I want to interrupt you again, if I may, Janet, and that is for the purpose of saying that on October 10th of last year, the Justice Department, which is one of those Orwellian oxymorons,
Right.
the Justice Department of the United States government released its own internal document of justification for the assassination of any American citizen living anywhere in the world, anytime they feel like it, and the similar assassination of anybody else who's not an American citizen living anywhere in the world, anytime they feel like it. This is not paranoid fantasy. This is not conspiracy theory on the outside. It's a conspiracy on the inside, and this Justice Department document is the theory on which it is justified. Please do continue.
Thank you so much for that, Rima. Yes, so we're basically in dire straits because as this document shows, and as my book reveals, these kill orders are being put on American citizens who are living within the United States, who are not involved in terrorist activities, and do not, at the time that this all took place, pose any level of threat. Now,
do you think, Janet? Do you think in your case you were put on this sort of list because a rogue federal agent lured you into a relationship and then decided to get you? Is that what happened?
He was not rogue.
All right, so you think that you were targeted intentionally?
Oh, he was not rogue. In the book, the progression of events as revealed in the book make that very clear.
All right.
He was on assignment, and this was his job.
Why you? Why were you being singled out? What were you doing?
This is a very good question.
And by the way, there
And
doesn't have to be a reason. As we know from Kafka, in the modern totalitarian state, you could be singled out for no reason at all. But anyway, go ahead.
well, the reasons, this kind of goes to the core of the development of the book, because at the time this was happening, leading up to my being assaulted nearly lethally by police, I was in a coma for several days. It was a very serious assault. Up until that point, I was quite puzzled as to the events that were taking place. And in a sense, the unfolding of the book Exile is also the unfolding of my discovery. Uh, what is America? What is America about? Why in the world would something like this happen to me? As the book, the back cover basically states, I was an out-of-work reporter at the time this happened. I was not involved in any activities that would have brought any attention onto myself ostensibly. So I think that the unfolding of what this is all about provides a very disturbing uh, sort of bird's eye view into what America's agenda is actually all about. I use the words demographic targeting. I think uh, I think that another way to say demographic targeting uh, could be eugenics, and this is something, as part of my own process of discovery. These are the conclusions I have come to. Now, the issue involving this agent Jack Leonard Smith. By the way, I did at one point in time uh, get a private investigator to look a bit into Jack Smith. He appears to have begun using that name around 1990. There isn't any record of him, Jack Leonard Smith, no credit history, no work history prior to about 1990, so it does appear to be an assumed name. I do have some leads at this point as to who he might actually be, but until the point that this is totally confirmed, I'm not going to come forward with this. So it is a name that is could be considered virtually untraceable. I mean, Jack Smith, how many Jack Smiths are there, do you think, in the United States?
Right.
Quite a lot. So at the point of him approaching me, as I said, I did end up getting romantically involved with him. I did live with him for a while. And upon moving in with him, there began to be a lot of attention paid by him specifically to what was going on with my mother. And my mother's situation was apparently twinned with mine here. If, with your permission, I'd like to just read the prologue. The book is only one page.
Please.
And it gives an idea as to, what the story it does involve on some level. So, okay, the prologue is, this is a story that should never have been told. The two principals in this story, my mother, Emily Phallen, and I, should by all accounts be dead and the witnesses intimidated. 2 out of 3, Emily died at the hands of the United States of America, and the horrified onlookers have indeed been cowed into silence. This is a story which has repeated itself throughout human history. For reasons of demographics, of whose child you were, what ethnic or religious or economic group you were born into, people have been systematically slaughtered throughout recorded history. The difference in this story is what happened to Emily and to me happened in the country which holds its face up to the world as the bearer of light, of freedom and justice and democracy. This story unmasks America at a time when her imperial efforts, all in the name of defending and spreading democracy, have resulted in a centralization of power on a global scale hitherto unknown in our history books. When I first considered writing this book, many of my friends and advisors suggested I write it as fiction. They thought the nearly incredible accounts of covert savagery and brutality, of remote killing technologies, of the ease with which both friends and strangers were compromised and co-opted might be best translated into a kind of the net meets the enemy of the state. I declined their counsel for the following reason. While I know very well that this book may incur a knee-jerk reaction of denial in some of my readers, the fact remains that this is truth, not fiction. These events took place. The persons named are culpable. As a personal statement of what happened to Dr. Emily Phallen and to her daughter, myself, this book stands as a piece of history at a time when the world is changing rapidly. It is my deepest hope that this testament will be taken as the strongest warning possible.
Well, I can only congratulate you, Janet. Our guest is Janet Phallen. I can only congratulate you for refusing to fictionalize and therefore trivialize what you needed to say, because it was true. I know that this is very difficult for you emotionally, and I will ask you to tell us as much as you can and remind the reader that we are talking about the book Exile, and Janet has painstakingly and fearlessly gone forward with a great deal of detail there. So whatever you're able to share with us, we will take gratefully under advisement, and I urge you, when you can, to read this book called Exile by Janet Phallen, and we'll be telling you a little bit later on how you can get it. Please go ahead, Janet.
Right. So, as I was saying, upon the initiation of this relationship with Jack Leonard Smith, I was living in Long Beach at the time, and he was living in West Hollywood. After a few months of our becoming an item, however you want to say it, suddenly my landlady is telling me I have to move. I mean, she's just really leaning on me, and she won't tell me why, but she's, on the verge of kicking me out, and I have so I'm trying to find another place to live, and amazingly, I can't even get a call back. I mean, I'm going through lawn ads, I'm trying to find, writing down phone numbers, and I can't get this has never happened to me before. So I ended up approaching my new boyfriend, like, oh gosh, I've got to leave where I'm living, and would it be okay if I stayed with you for a while? And so I actually told this story to someone I knew who had worked with the CIA for quite a period of time, and she sort of chuckled and said, oh yeah, they parked you with him. So that's how I really ended up living with Jack Smith for a period of time. And upon the initiation of my residing with him, as I mentioned, a lot of attention began to be paid to by him to my mother and her situation, which involved actually my sister stealing from her. My sister was living with my mother at the time and was, trying to forging checks. A lot of problems going on with that. And so upon the sort of prodding and guidance of Jack Smith, I ended up contacting a lawyer in the same county my mother was in. Actually, I think, well, it was in the Inland Empire in California. And this attorney, J. David Horspool, put my mother under a conservatorship, essentially. The conservator being Melody Scott. Anybody who does not know the history and the ethics of conservator Melody Scott is certainly invited to Google her. But at that point in my life, I didn't even know what a conservator was. I mean, Dave Horspool had told me it was like a bookkeeper, and I thought, well, that's great. We'll stop my sister from stealing, and everything's going to be okay. And of course, as we know, conservatorships are one of the grave processes for depriving someone of all of their civil rights, all of their property, and as concerns are really ramping up countrywide, as we are finding more and more conservators making, shall we say, inappropriate end-of-life decisions for their wards. I believe that can also be called murder. And Melody Scott has actually shown herself to have no ethics in that regard. So my mother was put into a very perilous situation. And after a few months into the conservatorship, I was in the habit of speaking with my mother every day, and it was becoming more and more difficult because the conservator was attempting, to block the communications, not allowing me to speak with my mother. But I was talking to her, and she told me she was very ill, and no one was paying attention to her, and that would be the two hired companions hired by Melody Scott, my sister being one of them. And so I took this as a very serious warning. I sped down to Temecula, where my mother was living, and found her just incredibly messed up. My mother was a very bright and educated woman. She had a PhD. She had only stopped working a couple of years prior. She was in really pretty good shape mentally and so forth. And she was so confused. She could hardly walk. She didn't think she could walk out to the car because I wanted to take her to the emergency room. It was a nightmare, but I got her to the hospital. She was evaluated and admitted, and shortly thereafter taken into surgery because her heart was going down fast, and a pacemaker was put into her chest. So upon returning home, to my mother's home, I, on a hunch, looked at my mother's medicine. My mother had been a heart patient. She had been on Cardura, and amazingly, there were 2 full undispensed bottles of Cardura. No one had given my mother her heart medicine in about 2 months. So I called the police. I mean, something was going on that was really pretty bad. And police came, they took my report, they counted out the pills in the Cardura, they left, and shortly thereafter I was notified that Melody Scott had gone to court and gotten a restraining order against me, saying I had unnecessarily transported my mother to the hospital, thereby causing her grave emotional harm. Problem was, my mother had been transported to the hospital and had life-saving surgery. So interestingly enough, this temporary restraining order was issued without any notification of me, against the law, by the way, but, at that point I was in such a state of bewilderment, I didn't really understand the implications of that. So I went to court on the date that the restraining order came to hearing, which was August 1st of 2002. I am documented as being in court when court opens and when court closes. That documentation is also in the book. The restraining order was never called to hearing, and it was permanently restrained from my mother without due process. So that was sort of the beginning of what other people call lawfare, the use of the legal system as a weapon. From that point on, things got more and more unusual. I did get the police report. They had falsified the report and stated that the medicines that my mother wasn't being given, they put another medicine name there. And when I called the police to, have them correct the record, they said, don't contact us again. Within 2 months, I was hit with another restraining order, which is also copied in a book, which disallows me. Remember, I'm an American-born citizen. Disallows me from contacting the police, the Department of Justice, the Adult Protective Services. I was essentially blocked. Oh, and also the CIA. I mean, that was very odd. I couldn't figure out why the judge put that in there. But I was essentially blocked from contacting anyone who could possibly help my mother's situation. At that point, Jack Smith and I had sort of done our split, gone our separate ways, and suddenly my situation became extremely dangerous. As soon as I left Jack permanently, and I was really sort of forced to leave him through an act of violence on his part, I moved back into a little cottage in Long Beach by myself. And the things that transpired from October to December of 2002 are really, and are recounted in my book, are frankly almost incredible. I came home to my little cottage. I've been in Riverside for a couple of days trying to go to court again for my mother. I was walking back to my cottage past the main house where the landlady resided, and I hear her say, "Oh, she's here. Quick, call the police." I thought, what? So I go into my little cottage, and it's been tossed. I mean, things are just thrown around everywhere. Now, somebody who in that situation would normally call the police, but I'm thinking, well, what's going on here? The police are already coming. So I started looking around, trying to figure out, and I saw all these little pills all over the floor, drugs. And the police are coming, right? I had no idea what those pills were. I don't think I'd ever seen little pink pills like that before. So, like, it was quite a crisis for me. And luckily, I pulled all the blinds, I shut all the windows, I started scooping and flushing, and as soon as I heard the police coming, I kind of froze. And lucky for me, they went away without breaking in the house. So that was an effort at entrapment. And there are other details. A number of other efforts at entrapment took place, but things got a little worse than that. And at some point, there began to be the use of lethal weaponry against me. When I seemed to have a sort of a talent, knack, a grace, whatever you want to call it, for walking through some very dangerous situations like that entrapment with the drugs. And at one point, it looks like the people who had decided that I really needed to get off the planet, so to speak, began to use some very dangerous weapons against me. And this is also listed, and reviewed in the book. I want to say that I do not believe that I am the only person in any sense that this has happened to. For some reason, I have been given, the opportunity to survive some very perilous situations and have, some minor abilities in writing, so that I have been able to, produce this book. I think that we probably have an awful lot of truth tellers, people who have maybe witnessed the kind of revocation of justice, that was happening to my mother, essentially. They have witnessed this happening to others who have not been as lucky as I was. I think we probably have a lot of people sitting in jail or in prison on entrapment, bogus entrapment charges. I think that the use of the kind of weapons that I have detailed in this book, which are extremely lethal weapons, I think we probably have some very good people who are now residing in the cemetery who were not as lucky as I was. And I think that these weapon systems need to be exposed. I think that the fact that government agents are being planted on, entirely naive. At that point, I was extremely naive and innocent parties for the purposes of murder is something that cannot get enough exposure.
Janet, let me ask you two questions. One, was your mother targeted because she was wealthy?
No.
Why, there are so many.
They don't plant federal, there's a lot of people being targeted because they're wealthy. And this is what's happening in a lot of these probate guardianships and conservatorships. But they don't plant federal agents on those situations.
So it still doesn't make any sense. Not that that insanity makes sense, but I still don't have a picture of why Janet Phallen was marked in this way. But I also would like you. Yeah, go ahead.
No, go ahead, please, Rima.
I also would like you to tell us at least a little about what you call weapon systems, because a gun wouldn't just be a weapons. I mean, a gun wouldn't be a weapon system. It's a weapon. So there's something more in that pair of words, and you use words very, very precisely. What do you mean by weapon systems?
Right. Well, I want to speak for a moment about guns as a means of government killing American citizens. At this point in time, particularly after the uproar after what happened to reporter Gary Webb, he had written for the San Jose Mercury News and had done quite a bit of exposing of the CIA funneling drugs into the inner city. But Gary Webb, to my understanding, was on quite a different story at the time that he, quote unquote, committed suicide and shot himself in the head twice.
That's determination.
Yeah, come on. Like, yeah, and when the LA Times ran this big story on how Gary Webb was so depressed and shot himself in the head twice, I actually had some input on what Webb was actually working on at the time that this happened, which was really quite explosive. And I called the Times and said, I think maybe that you made an error here because people usually can't shoot themselves in the head twice. But interestingly enough, the editor and the involved writer never returned my call. So, there were a lot of people who were aware that Gary Webb was murdered. And I think that decisions were made kind of based on that. Then it might be better to use other kinds of weapons against people because it becomes too obvious. And martyrs are made by people being shot. And if you want plausible deniability, it might be better to use poison. Mm-hmm. So, and there are other ways. When I talk about weapons systems, it does get pretty complicated. I have a whole chapter where I sort of step back from the narrative and talk about the history and the use of both biological and chemical assassination weapons.
Let me jump in for a moment, Janet. I
Sure.
guess Phallen, the author of Exile, a nonfiction work that you have to read. I happen to know, and Ralph knows as well, one of the people who was called upon to use scientific brilliance and expertise. Actually, I know two of the people to develop some of those weapon systems, specifically the poison, specifically for the CIA. Janet Phallen is not telling you mad ravings. She's telling you reality.
Dr. Rima, actually, she's an example of Dr. Rima's corollary. If you may recall, there's the old legal saw, Power Corrupts, which I think it was Lord Acton changed it to or added to it. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. And Dr. Rima's corollary to that is, and it makes you crazy as well. And I think it's true. We are actually dealing with people who become psychotic because of the behavior which their positions in society sanction. And so
And
now
become
our
psychotic in groups and
right,
reinforce each other's psychosis.
right. We watch, for example, how the former peace officers, now occupying forces known as the police departments, nationalized and militarized, have increased the number of shootings that are going on. Shootings of companion animals and shootings of unarmed, or I should say disarmed, civilians. And that's beginning to get very, very
Well,
problematical.
it's
Janet,
interesting.
back in the early, when it was happening to you, you were being targeted. It's almost become random violence at this point, a decade later.
There was definitely an element of randomness in this, and there does appear to be like a motivation, but the fact that my mother and I were chosen here, I do believe there was an element of randomness. I certainly don't believe that it was because I was such an amazing investigative reporter, because as I have stated in the book, I wasn't even working at the time, and most of my career up until that point had been involved in writing little social commentaries and little reviews of plays and things like that. I was on the culture beat. I wasn't on the political beat. So when they approached us, and because of the fact that I was not working, my mother was retired, we were essentially extremely vulnerable rather than powerful. So I don't want people to think that, that this is because I was, on the air and writing all this stuff. I was not. I was a nobody. And I think that they do try to choose vulnerable targets. The problem in my situation was that after I survived this assault on January 3rd of 2003, given the fact that I do have, certain media skills, and certainly at that point would have nothing except intentionality to expose these sorts of abuses, at that point, I do believe I became something of a threat. Whereas when this started, I was not at all.
When you were assaulted, was it just a sudden being jumped upon, or was there some sort of provocation theoretically? What happened?
Well, yes, and it happened, within a couple of months after I'd left Smith. I had all these, really horrific things happening to me, living in this little cottage in Long Beach. My mother was essentially disappeared at that point in time. I was spending most of my days like on the phone trying to reach lawyers, the human rights agencies, civil rights agencies, and 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 then media, trying to get other people to pay attention to what was happening. And what happened to me, where I was attacked, it was not a casual. It was essentially a sting operation. And I was taken. Well, I've got a section here. If I can find it real quickly, I could read it. If I can find it. Let's see. Trying to thumb through here and get back. Not. Yeah, I'm having a little problem with my online.
By the way,
Sorry about that.
you hear a bit of noise. Janet is in an internet cafe, which, because of the situation she's describing, is not the same location as it might be on another day, and she is protecting herself through that means. So she's making great efforts and putting in a lot of trust and care to be with us, and I appreciate that very, very much. Have you found the passage you were looking for?
Well, I'm really having a problem here because I've got this. Okay, maybe I do have it here. Yep, I'm almost got it. Okay. Well, as I was trying to relate, there was a lot of activity going on around me. And it was really becoming frightening. And okay, let's see. I think I've almost got it here. Okay. Yeah, I can read a section here. So there had been a lot of activity. You know, things were getting pretty overwhelming, and I felt extremely, isolated in what I was going through. So here, I stopped off at a food court and ordered a chicken burger. I was waiting for the order when someone bumped into me. Turning, I saw the very same fellow from the metro the night before. He grinned at me broadly, the same glittering and practiced smile. "They cut up your black cat," he announced. Before I could say anything, he was gone. I rushed outside, looking up and down the street. Parked in front of Denny's was a police car. I walked up to the window. "I'm coming in," I said. "We'll be waiting," the cop replied. I went looking for a payphone. I made a phone call to a lawyer who I had seen several months back about my mother. He had seemed kind and concerned, but was unwilling to help. "Things are worse," I blurted out when he came to the phone. "Where are you?" he said. "Long Beach Boulevard," I said. "I'm going to the police." The line disconnected. It was Friday night, and the streets were full of people. I walked around, at once deeply aware of all of the activity in the street and also detached from all of it. I wondered if I had fallen into an alternate universe. I was turning to walk towards the police department, situated on First and Long Beach Boulevard, when I felt a sudden surge through the crowd. People were beginning to run. Looking up, I saw a helicopter only yards above the street. It was swooping down, and there were cries of alarm as people began to dart for cover. I was swept along into a late-night pharmacy. The copter was buzzing the street. It was swooping down as low as it could get, then pulling up and retreating several streets away. I saw it turn around and begin its descent again. A girl screamed and ran into a restaurant across the street. The time had come, and I knew it. I left the store and began walking down Long Beach Boulevard. I stopped at a supermarket for a cold drink. The security guard there greeted me. "I heard you're coming in," he said. I should have been startled, but I was beyond that. "You a cop?" I asked. "Yeah," he said, "I'm moonlighting." "Come on," he offered, "I'll go with you." We walked down the boulevard in silence. 2 blocks before the police department, he peeled off. "This is as far as I can take you," he said. I walked the remaining blocks alone. An officer was waiting in the lobby. He was tall, strapping, red-haired. "We're expecting you," he said. "What now?" I said listlessly. "I'm ready to take you," he said, "but you'll have to be handcuffed. Otherwise," he said, "I'll just push you back out on the street." Out of the corner of my eye, I saw 2 officers escorting a fellow into the elevator. Black man, nicely dressed, and I recognized him immediately as a patrol officer. He was cuffed, and one of the officers was carrying a green backpack. It was identical to the one I had left with the police in the LA Civic Center a couple months back. Sure, I thought, why not? The world no longer made sense. As the officer handcuffed me, I peered at his badge. Dawson. I was put in the back of a squad car. So we're going to go a little further here. Let's see. "Where are we going?" I said. "To die," said Dawson. He seemed to straighten up and declared, "I am operating under the protection of the president." "Can I choose how?" I asked. He chuckled. "I don't want any violence," I said. I could just see myself smashed to a bloody heap by this big officer. Negotiating my demise, I said, hopefully, a drug overdose would work. He chuckled again. "Sure thing," he said. So that's all I'm going to read. So yes, I was given a drug overdose, and I was unconscious for 3 days and woke up in a Long Beach hospital on a heart monitor.
Good God.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Good.
Why didn't they follow through with this extrajudicial execution?
I'm sorry, what was that?
Why do you think they did not follow through with
well, there's. I think they gave it their best shot, and there were certain things that happened while I was in the hospital. I don't want to give all of that away; it gets pretty complicated. But let's say I was not released from the hospital in tip-top shape.
Well, I would
to say the least. And within a very short period of time, something happened to me. Very short period of time because of what had happened in the hospital. So there was began to be quite a bit of further activity around me. Now, these events that I was reading, this happened after that entrapment effort with the drugs. It happened after my cottage started to burn down as I slept. There had been a number, actually, the situation was becoming emergent. And so as I said earlier, I think that I have been extraordinarily lucky, and having figured out what this was actually all about. I've mentioned the words demographic targeting. There certainly was a specific demographic at play here, and as I go further into the book, and the book is really, in a sense, my process of discovery as well as the story of what happened, it becomes clearer as to what this very likely was all about. And I don't want to give that all away on the show, but there was an element of randomness. But the fact is, there was a demographic issue that is I think will shortly become enormously apparent to many other people in terms of the U.S.'s actions. The U.S. is essentially now operating under a system of plausible deniability. What happened to me, I was given a drug overdose. Well, it happens that I don't use drugs, I don't smoke, I'm not a drinker, but I must have been just so depressed, I ended up scoring drugs. So this is this would have been the cover story. So this would have been a murder, a suicide by cop, plausible deniability. And we can see very clearly in a lot of the U.S.'s actions now, not only domestically but abroad, the attempt to invoke plausible deniability to keep the public persona of the United States intact. One of the more recent issues that where this was invoked, there was that gas attack in Syria, in Damascus, back in August. I actually broke a story having to do with the very likely involvement of the United States in that. The efforts, the U.S. wants to invade Syria, and this is obviously part of the global chessboard. Well, now we're having a series of gas attacks because it appears that Putin derailed the initial effort to go into Syria because of this. And most recently, I believe it was like April 30th, there was another gas attack in a part of Syria, and the U.S. is stating, well, this had to be Assad because they were dropped from helicopters, and we know only Assad has helicopters. Come on. Only Assad has helicopters? You can see where the the seams are busting at the efforts by the United States to continue to invoke increasingly ludicrous explanations in order to advance its own agenda.
Well, how is it that you were able to escape the United States? Let me put it this way. Do you feel safe telling us?
Oh, yes, it's in the book. I mean, essentially, several years had lapsed after the events that I left the country almost immediately after all this started. And at some point, I made a decision to come back and to use whatever skills I have to try to make a difference. Writing, possibly eventually doing radio, as it turned out. At the time that I left in 2008, I was living and working in Medford, Oregon. I was working at a newspaper in the Patriot movement, and I was hosting 2 radio shows every week, one at the local Pacifica affiliate, KSKQ, and also on Republic Broadcasting Network. And there began to be increasing police activity around me again. And this is detailed. There are some documents that are in the exhibit section that showed where the police were actually falsifying records, apparently in order to launch another arrest. The falsified records are included as exhibits in the book. And at the time that I realized that this is what was happening, again, I decided that it was time to fold them. And as the police, I've got a call in from Rima here. Am I still on the air?
That's a really good question. You're on the air with me. We're on the air. Yeah, I think Dr. Rima is a problem. She seems to have been knocked off. That sometimes happens. After all, we're all thousands of miles apart from each other. Studio B and me and you and let's see. She's having some problems. We're gonna call her back. Not? Oh yes, we're on the air.
Oh, okay. I didn't know.
The air is controlled from my end here in the woods of northwest New Jersey. And we'll see if we can get Dr. Rima back on. Folks, you are on the Dr. Rima Truth Reports on Revolution Radio, Studio B, www.freedomslips.com.
You're back. Oh, good.
All right, excellent. Very good, Dr. Rima. Well, as I was explaining to Janet, we are each thousands of miles apart, and I believe, Janet, that there may have been an earthquake recently in not too far from your part, from where you happen to be. I presume that you're not interested in letting people know where you are right now. You are in exile.
I have no problem with that. Okay. I'm unfortunately appear to be radioactive. I mean, I think I broadcast.
We're all radioactive, I'm afraid, but that's what matters.
Actually, while I was in the hospital, unconscious, I was chipped, and the chip has shown up on an X-ray, and so I appear to be. I just broadcast now. So right. So I am in Chiapas, Mexico.
Okay. And, I'm told there was an earthquake in Mexico City within the last several hours.
I did not know that.
Yeah, I'm looking into that now as we speak. But we are about to reach the end of the first half of this Dr. Rima Truth Reports. We have perhaps 2 minutes before the bumper music will come in, signaling the break.
Are you able to stay with us over the break, which is about 5 minutes, Janet?
The computer cafe that I'm using closes approximately in 6 minutes.
All right.
They're very nice here. They might extend a few minutes longer for me, but I'm basically going to have to leave shortly. I do want to mention where the book is available.
Please.
It's not on Amazon. It's only on thebookpatch.com.
Thebookpatch.com? Got it.
Right.
Let me put that down here.
And people, if they are interested in, not only the lurid details of my life, but also what does this mean? Because this is really my purpose in writing this book. What does this mean? What is the relevance here for other people? Because there certainly is relevance. and since I, have come to the conclusion that the U.S. is involved in extensive demographic targeting, and as this was apparently an aspect of that, this conclusion does affect potentially many other people. So I do encourage people who are concerned about what may be happening to them, their neighbors, what the bigger picture may be, to please buy the book.
The book is Exile. Our guest has been Janet Phallen, who must go because her internet cafe is closing. Janet, you are welcome to come back anytime you are ready to share more with us here on the Dr. Rima Truth Reports. Thank you so much.
Thank you both so much. God bless. Bye-bye.
God bless, and we will be back for the second hour of the Dr. Rima Truth Reports. Stay tuned.